I am the city historian for Waterbury, and I guess I'm invisible because all of you are upstairs and I'm downstairs. As we go on our tour, we look at the architecture, we talk about the history, the development of the city. The question that comes to mind is, what made Waterbury a city? We know it was the brass center of the world, but just to point out, we are sitting in the middle of the Cass-Gilbert district. Cass-Gilbert was brought in by Henry Sabin Chase, and if you are looking straight out, if you look to the left, you will see the corporate headquarters for Chase, which Cass-Gilbert designed. And Henry Sabin Chase was very much into the City Beautiful movement, and his company, the Chase Manufacturing Company, was probably the smaller of the three main companies of Waterbury: Scoville's, American Brass, and Chase. And there were numerous others as well. But just to give you an idea, the Chase Manufacturing Company produced over 34,000 different products and had over 3,000 employees. Scoville's had about 18,000 employees. And the biggest company in the end was the American Brass Company. So the only thing that Waterbury had going for it really was water. It had lousy soil. It wasn't a good farming community. It didn't have natural resources like minerals and so forth. And so what it produced through Yankee ingenuity were copper tubing, brass wire, munitions, coins, buttons, medals, pins, watches, brass tubing, clocks, lamps, even mixers and ice cream scoops, you name it. Anything that they could produce, they did. Paints, chemicals, pilots, auto parts, industrial items, photography. The earliest photography in the country was here in Waterbury. Scoville sent people over to study Mr. Daguerre's methods, and we started photography in the 1840s. So Waterbury also very much noted for its buttons, a button town, a watch town, a clock town. If you have a sports coat on and you have a button, it was made by the Waterbury Button Company. They still make them for over 200 years. They made them for everyone. Even Lee and Gratt at Appomattox both had Waterbury buttons on their uniforms. So the saying was, Waterbury has something on everybody, and they did. So this is what initiated the wealth of Waterbury, the great manufacturing industries that started in the early 1800s and blossomed in the 1900s and the first half of the 20th century. So here we are in the Cass-Gilbert district, and we're going to start by looking at the 5 buildings that he designed as part of that City Beautiful movement. To your right is the City Hall that you just came out of, the first building, 1915. Across the street, as I said, is the Chase building. Up ahead, on your right, on the corner of Field Street, is the Waterbury National Bank building, also designed by Cass-Gilbert. We're going to go up there, we're going to take a turn to the right on Field Street, and as we go down on your left, you're going to see 2 more modest buildings, and they were also designed for Mr. Chase, a dispensary, and another house called the Lincoln House. They were designed by Cass-Gilbert. So we're on our way.
I want to be in that car. What's she gonna do? She's gonna freak out. Holy shit.
That's crazy. How do you do it, kids?
And as you can see, Cass-Gilbert was very interested in designing symmetrical, balanced buildings. Most of the buildings that you see in Waterbury during that period, the golden age was 1880 to 1920, I would say. But you're going to find that they followed the more classical European designs that they imitated, such as Romanesque, like this building on the right, which is the City Armory. And they had also a lot of influence from the different types of Italian architecture, Roman Revival, Italian Revival, Second Renaissance Revival, every type of revival you could think of seemed to somehow or other worm it into the streetscape of Waterbury. Now we're coming down on Meadow Street, which was the farmland of the early settlers. of the 1600s and 1700s. And we're going to take a right here at this light. To your right, you see Library Park. It was designed by the Frederick Law Olmsted Company, who's the son of the father who did Central Park. It was the original burying ground in Waterbury. It was burying ground from 1686 to 1890. And we're going to pull over here to the right. There are these gravestones. If you look to the right, you will see the gravestones, the early gravestones of the settlers who were buried here between 1686 and 1890. In 1890, the mayor of Waterbury decided that the cemetery was unkempt and it should be made the new home of the library. So they exhumed graves, they exhumed bodies. People brought the bodies and the gravestones to other places. People who didn't have any descendants here to help them had to, can we stop? Had to, those bodies were removed and they were put into the cellar of the 1894 Silas Bronson Library. Now, across from the library park to the left is the famous railroad station, McKim, Mead and White. Okay, designed it. You see the very famous tower. It's the symbol of Waterbury, 240 feet tall, built in imitation of the tower on the City Hall in Siena, Italy. And this building, when it was constructed, they decided that what they had to do was make Grand Street look grand. So they widened this street, Meadow Street. They opened up Grand Street, which we will pass on the right. You see it has a wide opening. They took all the extra dirt and they plowed it into the land, which became Library Park, which is the land just beyond the wall to your right. It's a park. That was the park that Olmsted designed. And then when that was done, they took those old gravestones that were in the basement of the library and they placed them here against this wall where you could see them. And the bodies had been buried long before, the ones that no one claimed, and they were sort of dumped into an anonymous gravesite in the back of the library, and there's not even a marker for them. Now, the up ahead on your right, you can maybe just about barely see it, is the American Brass Company headquarters. That building was built in 1913. When it was built, American Brass Company, that had been, well, it was a conglomerate of many companies. It actually began with something called the Benedict and Burton Company. Mr. Benedict was quite an entrepreneur, and his company actually gave rise to the Waterbury Clock Company, which became, of course, Timex and the Mickey Mouse watch and all that. And he also gave rise to Waterbury Pin, a number of other companies. They all eventually became the American Brass Company, and by the time the headquarters is built, 2/3 of all the brass used in the United States of America is produced by the American Brass Company in Waterbury. When you go by the building, I know you have an eye to architecture, you will see how carefully they tried to use the Romanesque arches and the other little designs, bands around the building and so forth, to imitate and complement the McKim, Mead and White Railroad Station. Okay, if you have a chance, we can move on and go straight. If you could look into the front door of the American Brass Company, you will see the emphasis that is put on brass. Brass chandeliers, brass railings, brass, every type of brass accomplishment that you could put in there to sort of say, look, this is it, we're the brass center of the world. So take a look at those doors and the inside as we roll past it. It's now, of course, part of Superior Court system in Waterbury. Basically, we'll be going through what is called the Historic District in Waterbury. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. and the American Brass Building is on it, and we're going to be heading easterly. And everything we pass is included in that district, although perhaps not every building is on the registry. And we're going to take a right here. We're on West Main Street. So we're heading towards the city green. Where the first settlers built their houses in 1677. It was a swampland. Up there further we're going to pull over, not quite beyond this. Yeah. And we're coming up to the St. John's Episcopal Church, designed by Henry Dudley, and it was dedicated in 1873. It's done in the English Neo-Gothic style, and contains a number of beautiful Tiffany windows. When Tiffany was at the peak of its design, Louis Comfort Tiffany's design. So we're going to pull over to the side here because you can get a view, maybe right here. Yeah. You don't want to go too far.
No parking anytime soon.
You don't care? Okay. I don't either. So, all right. Am I still on? Okay. All right. So now, here we have this beautiful neo-Gothic church to our right. Up in front of us is Victory, okay, with an olive branch headed out towards us to celebrate the end of the Civil War and to bring peace back to the United States of America. This is to represent the unification, and you can see in those little niches there's a figure, a bronze figure in each one. The one facing us shows a man heading out with a gun, a rifle, and so forth, and he's heading for the west. The one heading to the south, which is to your right, shows a boy being freed from his shackles, a slave boy, looking up at a woman reading to a boy. And the promise is that he too now will become educated. He will understand the written word. He will be read to. This statue was built by Edwin Bissell and designed by him. He was a noted sculptor, studied mainly in Europe, but a local boy. He came from near Waterbury. He worked in Waterbury as a kid, and so they asked him to build it, to design it, and he did. And it was done all through public subscription. There was no money paid by the city of Waterbury, the town of Waterbury, to build this. It was supposed to be dedicated in 1884, and it was, but they were behind schedule. So they had to bring in a new invention, a new technology called electric lights, and they strung them around here. And every night people would flock down, not so much to see the building, but to see the electric lights. As you look across the green, that sort of modernistic work is a work that was done to commemorate all the wars that Waterbury had participated in up to the time of 1958. Now we're going to go around the corner up Church Street, and we're going to go slowly because there's a couple of things to point out. Here we get an opportunity to see some of the very few houses that are left in Waterbury from the 19th century.
What's the Manitoba Museum?
This one, anybody know? Yeah, I know. Okay, on your left, matter of fact, if you could pull over, it'll be fine. On your left is the Rectory Building, a Richardsonian Romanesque rectory building designed by Robert Wakeman Hill. He was a Waterbury boy. He was the Dean of Waterbury Architects. He was the state architect under 4 governors, and he designed this building. You might be familiar with some of the others that he designed if you know the Opera House in Thomaston, or if you know the courthouse on the green in Litchfield. Now also here we have some of those very handsome houses that were left over from the 1860s and 50s. The two on the left here, sort of gray Victorians, one Italianate, the other one stick design, and this one, which looks like perhaps the Renaissance Revival, one on the right, which became the Convent of Notre Dame at one time, and the one up ahead, okay, which is an Italianate Revival design, all from the 1860s, except the one here on the right with the pillars is one of the oldest, 1857. And if we could stop to look down this street, just up a park right by that fire hydrant, we're not supposed to. That, if you look to your left, that's probably the oldest house in Waterbury. That was built in 1816. They call it Georgian style. Of course, I don't know if there's so many changes done to it, which we call it today. And so we can now continue up. Oh, by the way, that's the courthouse from 1911 on your left. And also second Renaissance Revival style. Now this modern building was built by Mr. Joseph Stein and Mr. Louis Facino. This is the courthouse. And across from it, that glass building is Joseph Stein's library designed for the Silas Brunson Library. And he believed in that method where sort of the architectural building sort of disappears into the landscape and becomes alive once you go in. And now you can see we're back at City Hall. So we're going to take a left here. And as we do, I'm going to fill you in a little bit of the story. We're going to eventually get down to the green, and we're going to take a better look. We'll see the clock on the green, and we will also see the 1888 statue of Knight, the water fountain, given in the will of Carrie Welton. And Carrie Welton came from the wealthiest family in town at the time that she lived, 1842 to 1884. She was very high-strung, very talented, very beautiful, very wealthy, and when her father died, take a look also here. Maybe we can pull over a little bit. Here, this is the Art Deco 1931 post office on your right. And as you can see, it does the history of mail delivery from the carrying pigeon all the way up to the airplane. It's very fanciful. And it's, George Totten was the architect, and he evidently also designed quite a few buildings in Washington, D.C. that are now used as embassies by various countries. On the other side is a magnificent group of what would you call it, eclectic architecture. When people come to downtown Waterbury, I notice this is where they all want to take a picture of this part on your left. Now, Carrie Welton was, after her father died, she inherited a great deal of money, and she was very sympathetic to animals, and she gave $200,000 to the help with the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And then after that, she decided, she was quite an athlete, she decided she wanted to hike Long Peak in Colorado, in the Rockies, and she got a guide, and she headed up towards that. This was in the 1880s, and 1884, on the way up to the top, she began to lose her breath. She had palpitations. A snowstorm was coming in. The guide said, "We have to go back down. This is dangerous. Let's return." And she said once she determined to do something, she always thought through, she would go to the top. Well, the snowstorm came in. It was September. The guide tried to get her down. He put her into a little alcove somewhere, covered her in blankets, went down the mountain, got his father, came back the next day. She was frozen to death. Became a national story because her uncles protested her will. In her will, she left another $100,000 to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The uncles were outraged. The mother came back from Europe for the trial. It was held in New Haven, covered by the New York Times. It was a sensation. And people tried to prove that Carrie was crazy. So, one of the most damaging piece of evidence was the water fountain on our green. She left money to have that designed and put there for animals. She wanted a replication of her favorite animal, Night, her horse that she used to ride wildly through the streets of Waterbury. She wanted that mounted at the top. And the problem is, as was pointed out in the court case, that Night was the horse that had kicked her father to death. And so they thought that that was outrageous enough to prove their case that she was insane, to have the money revert to the family instead of to the ASPCA. And what happened was that, okay, we continue on now if you want. What happened after that was that as they went through the will, they found a letter. You see, Carrie was a little paranoid, as she went to a psychiatrist and had the psychiatrist write a letter attesting to her sanity at the time that she made out the will. So the judge, reading that, said maybe Miss Walton was eccentric, but she wasn't insane, and the will would stand, and so we got the fountain, which was done by Carl Gerhardt. Remember the sculptor that Mark Twain really was enamored of, and who he sent to France to study. And many of Gerhardt's pieces are actually in the Mark Twain house. We're going to go straight. Yeah. Now I'm hoping also on this tour, not to just give you some of the stories and the history and talk a little bit about the architecture, but also to have you look at some of the projects that are going on in the city, some of the restoration and so forth. And so we're going this way so we can go by the Rectory Building project. The Rectory Building was built by an Irish, his parents came from Irish. He was an architect by the name of, having a senior moment, I can think of his first name, Joseph, it'll come to me. And he said that, and he was asked by the Irish community to build this rectory building in 1889. And it was to replace the first Catholic church in Waterbury called St. Peter's. We're going to go straight. Now, as we go by this building on the left, the Croft Building, built in 1904, it was also built by the same architect. And we're going to take a left at the light. Yes. Not here, no. Okay. This is the new magnet school beyond. So, the story is that the Irish wanted a church, and the Episcopalians were selling one. You know where that Civil War monument is? St. John's Church was there. It was a wooden church. The Irish Catholics wanted to buy it. They did buy it. They wanted to keep it there. They were told, no, you can't keep it here. They were told you have to take it out to what was called Dublin Street, Hamilton Avenue today. Bring it to your own neighborhood. So they brought it up East Main Street, where we are now. It got stuck in the middle of the street, so they had to buy a piece of land, and they shoved it in here on the left. You'll see the rectory building. It's the Richardsonian Romanesque building. So they shoved it in there, and in 1888, the church was raised, and this building was put in its place. Now it is being renovated, and it's being renovated to be a coffee shop downstairs, and it's going to be used for rooms for the University of Connecticut on the floors above. Here's the Palace Theater that we're going by. Now, that was also done in Second Renaissance style by Thomas Lamb for Mr. Poli in 1922. It was his flagship movie house. Now, there's supposed to be a cop here, so let us take a right turn. Oh. Okay.
There's an ambulance and a fire truck.
Yeah, there's a fire engine too. There's the horse.
There's the horse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, okay, another building that Waterbury's buying, we're going to take a left here, yes. Is this building on the right? Okay, a Venetian Gothic building. Also designed by Wilbur Griggs. If we can pull over here where the Elton is, over the Elton. The Elton Hotel, he also designed 1904. It was called the most attractive hotel in New England. It does have a bit of fame. James Thurber set his story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, in the lobby of the Elton Hotel in Waterbury. And also, here, of course, is where John Kennedy came at 3 o'clock in the morning to find tens of thousands of people a few days before the election on the Green. And of course, the story is when he saw all the people here, he said that he knew he was going to win the election. And he spoke from the balcony above the front door here of the Elton. And his family has come back. They promised that they would come back. Of course, he was assassinated, so his son came back at one point, and a school called Kennedy High School was named after John Kennedy. And just beyond it, you see the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception Church. The Basilica is also an imitation of a 16th century Roman church. We think Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, and it's famous for its canopy inside. And on the door, above the pillars, there is in Latin a statement saying, "The house of God and the gateway to heaven." Very exuberant church. This is the church that the Irish were finally able to build after, of course, they had gone through a bit of discrimination, were forced to bring that church up and onto East Main Street and couldn't get any further. They built another Immaculate on East Main Street across from the Palace Theater, and finally this one in 1928. And whenever you're ready, we could take a right-hand turn here on Prospect Street. We're waiting up.
Probably look funny with all the people upstairs and nobody downstairs.
These little streets are tough.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to drive up here if I was him.
You're accustomed to this. Here's the Trinity Church, 1883. Also had Tiffany windows. Henry Congdon was the architect of this building. Now, as we go up, you're going to get to Rose Hill. Rose Hill was the home of Carrie Welton. And the city of Waterbury has bought Rose Hill, and they're looking for a way to use it. I think they actually want to sell it to someone who will use it in a productive way. So we're going to slow up as we go across, done in the neo-Gothic style that was popular in the 1850s. And here it is to your left. Did you see that? There it is, the Rose Hill red. Okay. Prospect Street was the home of many of the brass barons, many of the businessmen, and it was one of the most fashionable streets at one time. We're going to continue beyond the steps. I mentioned to you Aaron Benedict, who started the Benedict factory, the Benedict in Burnham, and finally became, as I told you, the American Brass Company. And we're going to go by his house, and we're going to go by his son's house. And his house is going to be about the next corner. We're going to take a left. It'll be on your left-hand side. And as you can see, it's fairly
I
modest.
see a lot of buses up here.
It's this gray house on the side. But his son, Charles, decided to spend a lot of money. So we take a left here on Hillside. And he built a 22-room mansion with 8 fireplaces and 100 stained glass windows. And it's known as the Benedict in Burnham. Maybe we could pull over here a little bit. They could take a gander. And on the right, it's supposed to be one of the finest examples of Queen Anne Victorian in the country. Many of the mansions up here on the right-hand side were the brass barons built, and they brought in Pilisar, and all the top architects came in to design the mansions. Okay, we could go, and we're going to take a left, I think, down Central. It should be up on your left-hand side.
We'll start thinking.
Oh my goodness. Why'd we sit in front? Hope he's got good brakes.
It's fallen on tough times, and public and
Yes.
private are trying to, restore this neighborhood as much as possible. And there's been a huge restoration that's gone on, where 5 houses, 5 of these Victorian houses were actually taken and completely restored, and the Webster Bank was behind, their foundation was behind it, and the purpose here was to stabilize the neighborhood. So the 5 houses that they actually renovated came with the proviso that if you bought it, you have to live in it. 1 floor was for renting, they're 2-family houses, and the other floor, of course, was for the owner to live on. So we're going to be moving up close to them, and I'm hoping we could pull over so you could take a look at them. Where that car is coming out. That's-
I can tell the difference.
These 2 houses that you see on the left here, just beyond the street, and then 3 down the street that we can't go down because it's one way. Those are all the ones that have been restored and are for sale. We're coming back to West Main Street. You can see the side of the Gothic church. On your right is the Congregational Church, which has modern stained glass windows in it. They're symbolic windows rather than biblical stories. Right here.
Radial signs.
And we got a further one to take a look at this light. Yeah.
Look, the president's in the window. You know he was coming on Waterbury today.
This building ahead of you, the yellow brick, honey brick building, was at one time called the Waterbury Hotel, and it was within walking distance of the railroad station, and thus it served a need at that time. Now it's an apartment house. And there's our famous tower and our curved building on the left. And you can see the park beyond the curved building that was designed by the Olmsted. There's several parks in Waterbury that were designed by the old Olmsted firm. We're going to go and take a look at that park, at the library park, in a minute. So here is, on the left is the Douglas Orr's, okay, 1931 telephone company building. It has some Art Deco designs in the door, but it's Georgian revival, just like the City Hall. And here on the right, this was the graveyard. The graves were removed from where the library footings are, and this new library is built on the same footings. And we have some difficulties here because there's still 1,400 bodies in this park, and so when we have to do things like put in facilities for computers and so forth, and have to dig up parts of the art, we usually have to have the state come down and inspect if there's a bone missing, or we get a gravestone or something like that, make sure that we put it correctly back to where it should be. Now, up here further, you're going to see the modern mammal of the sperm whale, our state mammal. This is a sperm whale here on the right, made with rings, brass wings. And then beyond that, you're going to see the Benjamin Franklin statue. The Benjamin Franklin statue was done by Paul Bartlett, who was a leading sculptor of the 19th century. He was born in Waterbury, and when Elijah Leavenworth, one of the the wealthy families of Leavenworths, when he died, he left money and he wanted to have a statue built of Benjamin Franklin. Bartlett was living in Europe at that time. It was constructed in Europe. The war had just ended. It was about 1918 or so. The Benjamin Franklin was sent here, but it stopped at 22 different ports. It received quite a reception at every port, and finally came here for quite a dedication. But we're told that first some of the people were disappointed because they wanted to see a tall, strapping Benjamin Franklin, but instead what they got was Benjamin Franklin at the end of his life contemplating what he had seen through the 18th century, and so it was a much more reflective of Benjamin Franklin. But evidently, through the years, people have come to look upon it as a masterwork, to the point where the French have come over and actually taken moldings of it so they could replicate it back in France. So that is sort of our tour around the block. I'm thinking I didn't mention to you to look to your left to see the horse on the green, so I'm hoping that you did, even though I didn't say anything. I hope you saw it, the Carrie Welton fountain. And thank you. You've been very attentive, and I appreciate it.